following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
This year, it was announced that the New World Order were to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, consisting of members Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Hollywood Hogan and Sean Waltman. While the induction ceremony itself has likely been postponed this year, it's still great that some members of the groundbreaking faction will get added to the WWE Hall of Fame, whether you believe Waltman should be in this induction or not. We talk a lot about Nash and Hall. Finding information regarding their WCW history is pretty easy, and don't even start me on Hulk Hogan in the NWO. Those who follow this channel know that Hulk Hogan's full career is getting covered with multiple uploads. But then we have Sean Waltman, who worked as Syxx while in the NWO and while in WCW. Waltman's WCW days are never really spoken about, and I can see why this is. He wasn't one of the bigger names to make the jump from the WWF to WCW. He wasn't even active for a year while in WCW, and when he was active, he wasn't really placed into the main events. Syxx worked in the Cruiserweight division mainly, and this isn't a bad thing. If the NWO were to take down WCW, they would need someone who was able to challenge the Cruiserweight division of the WCW, and this was Waltman's job. Syxx ended up having some extremely good and extremely overlooked matches during his WCW tenure here, and this is what we will explore in today's video. When Razor Ramon and Diesel were getting ready to leave the WWF to join WCW, the two men, along with Click buddies Shawn Michaels and Triple H, had the famous curtain call in Madison Square Garden where the wrestlers broke kayfabe to say goodbye to each other and the fans in attendance. There was a member of the Click missing here though, and that was Sean Waltman. Waltman had been working in the WWF as the 1-2-3 Kid, and at around the time of the curtain call in May of 1996, he was working as a heel. Sean was unable to attend the unofficial farewell to the Click on the 19th of May 1996 due to being in rehab at this time. The 1-2-3 Kid had his final two matches of this WWF stint on the 29th of April 1996, two WWF Raw matches that would air on May 6th and May 20th. So while it's been reported that Sean Waltman had a match on Raw one day after the curtain call, this is totally incorrect. The May 20th Raw, of course, was a taped show. On May 6th, Mark Merrow defeated the 1-2-3 Kid in a good match, and in the May 20th episode, the Kid put over Savio Vega. Notable about the Kid's last match here with Vega is that when he walked out to compete, he looked directly at the camera and put up the Click hand gesture. After these Raw matches were taped, Kid went to rehab, the curtain call incident happened, Razor and Diesel left the WWF, and soon enough, Sean Waltman would follow suit. After having a discussion with wrestling super agent Barry Bloom and learning that Eric Bischoff was throwing money at wrestlers to join WCW, Kid got on the phone to Scott Hall and the wheels were put in motion to bring Sean Waltman into WCW and into the New World Order faction. When Waltman showed up, he was renamed as Syxx. Now, a couple of reasons are given for the name Syxx. The one we hear most is because 1 + 2 + 3 = 6, playing off his old WWF gimmick name. And the other reason we have been given, and the one I always thought was more fitting and correct, was because Waltman was the 6th member of the NWO. But if we look at all the official members of the NWO, Waltman was actually the 7th member if we include Ted DiBiase, who acted as the NWO's financial advisor. And also, there's an argument to be made regarding NWO's Sting. During Fall Brawl 1996, where Team NWO took on Team WCW, NWO Sting was played off as the real Sting, and it wasn't until the next night right after Syxx was welcomed into the NWO, that NWO Sting was also welcomed as a proper and permanent member of the New World Order. But this is all nitpicking a little. If you watch the Nitro episode where Syxx makes his debut, during the main event, Eric Bischoff flat out says he is called Syxx due to being the 6th member of the NWO. Have a listen.
The newest member is to be referred to from this point forward as Syxx. That's his name.
Syxx.
It's pretty easy to figure out. He's the 6th member. Let's go.
So yeah, 1 + 2 + 3 makes sense. It's logical and actually pretty smart. But if you pay attention to the commentary when Waltman shows up on Nitro, it's crystal clear they were going with the name Syxx due to Sean being the 6th member of the NWO, even though technically he was 7th. Right, let's take a look at the official debut of Syxx in WCW then. Around 25 minutes into the September 16th, 1996 episode of Nitro, Sean Waltman was seen sitting in the audience. This episode of Nitro was the night after Fall Brawl 96. The NWO had just defeated Team WCW in the War Games match after Sting walked out on his WCW teammates, so the New World Order were riding high at this point. When Waltman was shown on the screen, Tony Schiavone asked why was Waltman here in WCW, and Larry Zbyszko just flat out said that he's obviously there to join the New World Order. Mike Tenay approached Waltman and asked what was he doing here, and Sean said he heard that WCW was the top promotion in the world, so he came to check it out, and he patronised Mike Tenay when he asked who won the War Games match from the night before. Later in the evening, just before a match that pitted the strange tag team of Chris Jericho and Buff Bagwell against Arn Anderson and Ric Flair, Waltman stood up and pressed a button on a giant remote control. This made NWO flyers fall from the ceiling, so yeah, no tease, no is he or isn't he, Waltman would be part of the New World Order. During the Horsemen vs Jericho and Bagwell match, Waltman was seen outside. It was revealed that both he and NWO Sting would now be fully fledged members of the New World Order. Later in the broadcast, Eric Bischoff gave Syxx his name, as mentioned earlier. So the following week on Nitro, the NWO took over the entire broadcast and Syxx was right in the middle of it, along with his clique buddies Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. The three men would become sort of a faction within the faction, known as the Wolfpac, where they would invoke Wolfpac rules during tag matches, pretty much the exact same as the Freebird rule here, where either of the three men could compete in tag matches without any notice given, including WCW tag defenses. Of course, down the line, the NWO Wolfpac became a whole new stable on its own and had no involvement from Sean Waltman, but the original Wolfpac consisted of Hall, Nash and Syxx. Syxx also had his first WCW match here on this September 23rd episode of Nitro, defeating Jim Duggan in his debut match. Ron Studd was scheduled to face Duggan, but he was took out by Hogan and Nash, allowing Syxx to take Ron's place. Syxx made his WCW pay-per-view debut at Halloween Havoc 1996, facing Chris Jericho here in a decent match, though the finish was kind of typical of this era of the NWO. From his debut here right up until Halloween Havoc, Syxx did not have any other matches on WCW Nitro, but he did work a few house show dates with Eddie Guerrero. Anyway, at Halloween Havoc, the commentary team must have been asleep for a few weeks because they said on the headsets that this was the first time Syxx had ever stepped into a WCW ring, totally forgetting about the Jim Duggan match on Nitro along with the house show matches, although to be fair, house show matches seem to happen in an alternate universe in WCW. During the Jericho match, dodgy referee Nick Patrick slow counted the Lionheart a few times, allowing Syxx to get the win in the end, so Sean Waltman was victorious in his pay-per-view debut. Syxx then went on to have a few house show matches with Chavo and Eddie Guerrero before entering the 60-man World War III Battle Royal, a match that was won by the Giant. After working more house show matches with Big Bubba and having a relatively quiet beginning of 1997, Syxx would face Eddie Guerrero for the WCW United States Championship at NWO Sold Out in a ladder match. This is the recommended match of this video. Syxx's match with Dean Malenko at Super Brawl 7 was also good, but this one here at Sold Out was very entertaining, easily the best match of the evening for me. But to give a bit of backstory, Eddie Guerrero met Diamond Dallas Page in the finals of the US title tournament at Starrcade 96. During the match, Hall, Nash and Syxx came to the ring. Scott Hall hit the outsider's edge on DDP, allowing Eddie Guerrero to nail the frog splash and capture the US title. After the match, Hall, Nash and Syxx laid a beating into Eddie Guerrero. Eddie tried to fight back, but the numbers game was just too much, and the NWO let out the new US champion. Syxx stole the US title, and for weeks he would wear the championship belt on TV. It was decided then that if Eddie Guerrero wanted his belt back, he would have to climb up a ladder and retrieve it in a match against Syxx at Sold Out. People have very mixed opinions towards the NWO Sold Out pay-per-view of January of 1997, and I too have the same mixed feelings. The idea on paper was good. Give this ultra popular heel faction their own pay-per-view and see what comes of it. The problem came, in my opinion, during the execution of the show. The setup looked good, with the entranceway and ring being covered in NWO logos. I really liked the three founding members of the faction being on the three giant screens at the beginning of the show. It all felt very different, but some other aspects of the show fell a little flat. From the NWO arriving to the arena in dumpster trucks in the snow, to the downright strange Miss NWO contest, to an underwhelming undercard, there were things here during NWO Sold Out that definitely missed the mark. That being said, the final three matches of this show, in my opinion, were decent, with the Outsiders taking on the Steiners, the Giant facing Hulk Hogan in the main event, a match that was surprisingly better than anyone could have imagined, and of course, Syxx vs Guerrero in the semi-main spot. WCW 2 weren't all that big on ladder matches during and before this time period. There was the excellent Dusty Rhodes vs Tully Blanchard Lights Out barbed wire match from the second night of 1987's NWA Great American Bash, but really that was it. So for fans of WCW, it was a treat here to see the ladder get used in a WCW ring. Straight from the get-go, Waltman and Guerrero went at blazing speeds during this match, and while Eddie Guerrero may have been the better wrestler all around, Syxx didn't just hang in there with Eddie, but he excelled with an opponent like Eddie Guerrero. During his 1-2-3 Kid days in the WWF, Waltman wouldn't get many opportunities to work with smaller guys who were just as fast as what he was. While the Jericho match at Halloween Havoc had a good pace, Eddie Guerrero allowed Syxx to really display what he could do in terms of lightning quick offense. My only complaint about this match is that maybe it could have been a little longer. Anyway, the ending was quite unique. Both Syxx and Guerrero unhooked the belt at the same time, and the two men tried to get control of the belt while on top of the ladder. Guerrero was able to push Syxx off and grab the US title, winning the match as the audience cheered in approval. Eddie jumped into the crowd and celebrated with the WCW superstars who had been watching the show. Syxx didn't learn his lesson in regards to stealing championship belts. On the February 3rd, 1997 episode of Nitro, Dean Malenko defended his Cruiserweight Championship against Mike Enos. Fans may remember him as Blake Beverly of the Beverly Brothers. Syxx came from the audience and stole the Cruiserweight title belt. Malenko didn't notice until after he won the match, and he looked pretty annoyed. Syxx would pretty much do the same thing he'd done the month prior. He would wear the Cruiserweight title and parade around like the champion. The week after Syxx took the title, Malenko extended an open invitation to Syxx to step into the ring at any time to get a lesson in wrestling and respect. Dean also had a match with Eddie Guerrero on this night, and Syxx again tried to steal Eddie's US title, but Guerrero was able to stop him. The next week, Dean Malenko reminded Syxx that his father was the man who trained him, but his biggest lesson will come at Super Brawl when Dean gets his stolen US title back. Quick side note, this episode of Nitro, the February 17th, 1997 episode, features a great match between Dean Malenko and Robbie Brookside also. Fans of technical wrestling and catch wrestling shouldn't sleep on this one. Super Brawl 7 then, Syxx versus Dean Malenko opened up the show here, and it was another good match. Definitely the best normal non-stipulation match that Syxx had up to this point. I definitely prefer this match over the Chris Jericho Halloween Havoc showdown. Towards the end of the match, Syxx tried to use the Cruiserweight title as a weapon, prompting Eddie Guerrero to hit the ring. Eddie tried to get the belt from Syxx, but he was overpowered, resulting in Syxx smashing Dean in the face with the title. Syxx then pinned Malenko, and he officially won the Cruiserweight title. He wouldn't need the steel belts anymore. After this match, Syxx wouldn't have another TV match for nearly a month and a half. He did have a house show match teaming up with Kevin Nash to take on Lex Luger and the Giant in Minneapolis, but strangely he remained absent from in-ring competition, made even more strange because he was the Cruiserweight champion. The safe assumption here is that Waltman was dealing with some sort of injury. The 14th of March episode of Nitro, however, saw Syxx return to the ring in a match against Prince Iaukea, and from here, Syxx would also have some good cruiserweight matches week after week against Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, and again with Mysterio on the 5th of May episode of Nitro. So a good run of matches here where, just like the Guerrero match, Syxx was able to work against guys who matched him in terms of size and speed. The problem here was, this was 1997 WCW, and if you're in the New World Order, chances are you weren't winning matches cleanly. As a matter of fact, you never won cleanly. Syxx defeated all these great cruiserweights put in front of him, yet there was also some underhanded tactics going on to ensure he scored victories. Anyway, Syxx would end up dropping the Cruiserweight title to Chris Jericho at a house show on the 20th of June 1997. Shortly after this, on the 14th of July episode of Nitro, the Wolfpac invoked Wolfpac rules when Syxx replaced Kevin Nash and the Outsiders. Scott Hall and Syxx defeated Harlem Heat on this night. During this match, Syxx shouted a few naughty words that were picked up by the cameras, and he got in some serious hot water with Eric Bischoff because of this.
Late last night, all the way to December, we talked about.
Syxx then began a feud with Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen, which of course involved the rest of the NWO. Flair vs Syxx was booked for WCW Road Wild 1997, a match that Flair won, but Syxx would attempt to get the last laugh. The September 1st episode of Nitro saw Syxx get involved in one of the most infamous WCW promos of this era, when the NWO came out dressed up like the Four Horsemen. This promo, on the surface, seemed like any other promo where a faction would mock another group by dressing up like them, copying their mannerisms and whatnot, but it's been reported that Arn Anderson and his family took offence to Kevin Nash coming to the ring and making fun of Arn's addiction problems. Ric Flair too felt this was extremely disrespectful, and the NWO had gone too far this time. Now, it's also been said that the reports of Flair and Anderson getting upset were blown way out of proportion. They weren't that upset when it went down, and it was only after the fact that they both took offence. It all depends on who you believe or what interview you read here, so take that preceding information whatever way you want. Nobody can really be sure. Flair said in interviews, WWE produced interviews mind you, that he was angry and Arn's family was angry. Sean Waltman and Kevin Nash have said that Flair and Arn were laughing backstage at the segment and there was no ill feelings immediately after the promo went down, so it's hard to work out what the real story is here. Regardless, Syxx dressed up as Ric Flair and done a little bit of strutting around the ring, and I'll admit that I found it quite funny at the time. This whole thing led to the Four Horsemen team of Chris Benoit, Steve McMichael, Curt Hennig and Ric Flair taking on the NWO team of Buff Bagwell, Kevin Nash, Conan and Syxx at Fall Brawl in a War Games match. Curt Hennig turned on the Horsemen and joined the New World Order, and so the NWO was able to score the win. This was also Syxx's last WCW pay-per-view appearance. Nash, Hall and Syxx once again invoked Wolfpac rules on the 13th of October edition of Nitro, allowing Syxx to defend the tag titles along with Scott Hall in a match with the Steiner brothers. The Steiners won the match, meaning that the Outsiders had just lost the tag titles here. This was Sean's last WCW Nitro match, and what a good match to go out on also. The crowd was really hot for this one, it's worth checking out, but again, it's just a little short. Sean's final WCW match happened the next day then, beating Hector Garza on the WCW Pro tapings. So why did Syxx get released from WCW? Well, it's all a bit murky and there's no definitive one reason, but let's go through what we know. Eric Bischoff stated that it was rare to see Sean Waltman in a sober state during his WCW tenure. Bischoff said that while Syxx was a phenomenal performer in the ring, his personal problems always got in the way. Sean had got himself in some hot water during the Harlem Heat match where his profanity aired on TV, and he also got heat from Eric Bischoff for pulling Ric Flair's trunk stand on an episode of Nitro. He was actually fired and rehired on the same night after this happened. Syxx then took some time off to heal a nagging neck injury, and 2 weeks into his time off, he was fired via FedEx. Waltman himself believes his firing was a mixture of things, from having heat with Eric Bischoff due to the Harlem Heat and Ric Flair incidents, the neck injury, and also Sean believes Eric Bischoff made an example of him. Hall and Nash were apparently getting more and more difficult to control. They felt they were invincible, and so Eric fired Syxx to send a message to the outsiders. It's not like he was going to fire Hall or Nash in 1997. Bischoff, however, stated that Syxx was unprofessional. He was never in the right frame of mind to perform, and Sean Waltman was taking advantage of WCW's incapacity clause. Waltman's firing also made it to TV when Hulk Hogan famously told Kevin Nash on an episode of Thunder that his teeny tiny friend x-pac couldn't cut the mustard. This promo apparently hurt the relationship between Kevin Nash and Hogan and Bischoff. Sean Waltman remained away from TV screens until the 28th of April 1998, the day after WrestleMania 14. Sean Waltman returned to the WWF as X-Pac, the newest member of D-Generation X, where he was able to reunite with another old clique buddy. This time it was Triple H. Waltman called out Hulk Hogan during his WWF return, defending himself from Hogan's claims that he couldn't cut the mustard. In a line I always felt was unintentionally hilarious, Sean Waltman said, "I heard Hulk Hogan come out on television and say I couldn't cut the mustard. Well, Hulk Hogan, you suck, pal." Waltman also said during this promo that the outsiders would be standing right next to D-Generation X if WCW weren't holding Kevin Nash and Scott Hall hostage. X-Pac would go on to have a successful enough run in DX. No one can deny he wasn't popular for a long period of time while in the faction. Granted, his WWF popularity would take a nosedive pretty much when DX disbanded, but that's a story for another time. All in all, Syxx was there when WCW took off in a big way, and X-Pac was there when the WWF turned the tides. He got the best of both worlds. He didn't even work in WCW for a year, but he was able to have some good to great matches during his tenure. And if Eric Bischoff said that Sean Waltman wasn't clear-headed at the time, you can only imagine how good he would have been if he was sober. Hopefully you enjoyed this look at Syxx in WCW. The takeaway here then is that even though he may not have been in the best frame of mind during this time period, Sean Waltman had some very good matches in WCW that don't get talked about all that often. The Guerrero and Malenko pay-per-view matches were great, and his run with the Cruiserweight title also provided us with some good matches, at least when Waltman was actually booked to defend the gold. In fairness, I can also see why he isn't spoken about as much as other NWO members during this time frame. He didn't really shine in the faction, and as just discussed, there was a good couple of reasons for this. But all things happen for a reason, I guess. X-Pac joining DX made headlines, and the X-Pac character would fare much better than Syxx in WCW.